Hello, everyone, and here we are with Keynote. She's a trade and custom practice, and she will be presenting about managing international business risk in the new era.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm sure that we can all agree that just business overall, let alone international trade, has been very difficult and has changed dramatically in the past couple of months. I wanted to talk to you today about the fact that there are basically three things that I think people should be focusing on in a time of COVID, in a time of unprecedented trade tensions around the world. I think it's fair to say that we've seen more trade wars and more trade arguments, maybe not full-fledged wars, but more trade arguments between countries than we probably have seen in the past 50 or 60 years. We're definitely going through a big upheaval and a big change in the way that trade and business is done globally. And I think that there's a few steps that we can do right now to help to mitigate or to reduce the risk. For starters, the first point is being absolutely transparent with all the partners in your supply chain. So when I say all the partners in the supply chain, that's your manufacturers, your distributors, your customers, all of your advisors, whether that be your tax advisor, your international carriers that actually move your goods, freight forwarders, customs brokers, your income tax advisors. I heard some of the previous panelists say that you need to have a business plan and a business strategy. Of course, I agree with that wholeheartedly. You can't arrive at your destination unless you have a map and are clear on how you're going to get there. But it's important to understand that all those pieces of your plan, it's impossible for you as a business owner or as an entrepreneur to actually execute all the pieces of your plan by yourself. If you don't think that you need to rely upon service providers and others within your supply chain because you're afraid of the cost, then I would seriously sit back and question whether or not you think that you are ready to go global. Bringing advisors to the table does not always mean costs. Many advisors will sit at the table free of charge because as a client, they want to better understand your business. They want to better understand what is it exactly that you're trying to accomplish? Where are you trying to go? Who are you trying to sell to? What kind of timeline do you have in place? What specific market strategy do you have as far as who are you targeting from a marketing standpoint? They have all kinds of questions, and the more that they understand what you're actually trying to achieve, the more that those service providers and partners in your supply chain can actually assist you to get there. So calling strategic meetings where you're inviting to a conference call, for example, if you're using a courier to move your goods around the world, invite somebody from that courier company to a call, along with potentially, your in-country advisor or your in-country partner, if you have such a partnership or such an alliance set up with somebody in country, setting that up with some of the people who are available to you from your country to help you export, in this case, specifically to Canada. There's nothing wrong with calling together conference calls and getting 4 or 5 of those companies on the line at the same time for you to have an open discussion about what it is that you're trying to achieve and what you see the path as being. And you invite them to actually give you their thoughts, maybe their best practices of what they're seeing others are doing, and actually having an open discussion with all the advisors that you have, your income tax advisors, along with everybody else, your lawyers potentially, so that everybody can hear at the same time what others in the supply chain are saying. And I mean, I think it would probably be a good idea to have these kinds of calls maybe once a quarter, twice a year. It all depends on your business, maybe once a month, depending on how quickly your business is changing. But you'll find that often service providers, including consultants and whatnot, are willing to sit in on a call and to listen to what it is you're trying to achieve for 2 reasons. For starters, because you're a client and they want to ensure that they are servicing you. Not everything's always about collecting fees as much as it is about understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And then many of them afterwards will be able to envision what kind of services of theirs that you might actually need and benefit from. So, you know, I stress having a transparent supply chain with all the partners in that supply chain is really a best practice kind of thing. Another thing that I would suggest is actually being very, very clear on what you want your customer experience to be like. So for a lot of people, they spend a lot of time thinking about the marketing and the selling of the product and what that strategy should be around the actual, you know, the marketing, your website, explaining what your product is, all that sort of activity that surrounds the selling of the actual product. I would also suggest that that's just a small part of it. Actually envision from start to very beginning, from the very beginning, I should say, right through to the very, very end, what do you want your customer experience to be like? How do you want, what do you want the timeline to be between the time the customer orders a particular product of yours in another country? How much time do you want to have it between the time they place the order and the time they receive the goods? Keeping in mind, you have to have realistic expectations. And that's when having a transparent supply chain and having an open relationship with all of the service providers who help you to move your product, put your contracts together, do your accounting and your tax planning, get all those advisors together and kind of map out what you want your client experience to be. And think about it from every aspect of the client. So for example, if you're shipping into Canada, depending on what your products are, you want to be able to understand what is the border experience going to be like for your client. Are you, as the exporter, are you going to be the importer of record, and are you going to take care of all the border formalities for your Canadian client? Or is that something you want your Canadian client to do? And if you want your Canadian client to be the one who takes legal responsibility at the border to pay any duties and taxes, even though that's their responsibility to do it because that's how you're selling them the goods, it really, in this day and age, it mitigates your risk if you fully understand what that client is going to go through at the border. What exactly do they need to do? What taxes do they need to pay? What forms do they need to complete for various government agencies? What's the tariff classification of your product in that country? In this case, I'm going to say Canada. Do you understand how the Canadian government views your product from a duty and tax standpoint? You don't want your customer to have any surprises when they actually agree to buy your product and now it's coming in from another country into Canada. You don't want any surprises. Your customer doesn't want any surprises. They want to be able to receive that product and enjoy it or use that product as they envisioned when they made the decision to buy. So it's very important that you understand absolutely everything that's going to happen so that there's no surprises for them or for you. And that if you completely understand what's going to happen, how much tax do they need to pay? You know, what's the tax treatment? Is there something specific between different Canadian provinces that you may need to know about? How many locations does your customer have? What happens if your customer receives the goods and they're damaged or they're not according to order, or for some other reason your customer decides that they need to return the product, or the product isn't exactly what they wanted and now you have to enter into some sort of a return or a repair or a negotiation for them to potentially, you know, keep the product maybe at a reduced price. You have to think of all those scenarios in advance so that if something does happen, once again, you are absolutely prepared. You know exactly what position your company is prepared to take, whether or not you're prepared to, for example, pay for the shipping on returns, whether or not, and exactly you know what it is that you want, what your position is, so that when those unexpected things happen, they're not actually unexpected. You've thought about all of this in advance. So, and again, service providers and those who are around you can really help with pointing out things that you may not be thinking of so that you get that full picture of exactly all of these potential scenarios and what your potential solution can be, so that the moment something happens, your customer is very impressed by you because you're able to almost instantly propose a solution and to be able to understand and know exactly what it takes to enact that solution very quickly. Customers are impressed by that kind of thing. But what that also does is it actually mitigates your risks. It mitigates your risks of not being paid, of having an unhappy customer at the end of the situation. The more that you actually take control of the entire process and you know the entire process, even though you may not be legally responsible for all of those steps, that your customer may be responsible for some of those steps, the more that you understand each one of those steps, the less risk you actually have of being taken by surprise, of being actually charged something, a fee or something that you weren't anticipating, or the customer gets an unexpected fee or some sort of tax or something that they have to pay that they didn't expect. And now, even though it's not your fault, it's still associated with the purchase of your particular product or service. So, demystifying everything as much as possible. And then the third thing, so I said that there was three things. The first thing is being transparent in your supply chain, right? Get all the partners of your supply chain together and have those conversations so that you can understand what all those steps are. The second thing is understand and actually design your customer experience. What do you want your customers to experience at every step along the way? And make sure that you know it backwards and forwards, even if you're not legally responsible for all of it. And the third part of it is making sure that whatever those first two parts concluded, whatever the conclusions were from those first two parts, now you're putting it in writing. You're putting it in contracts, you're putting it in terms and conditions with your supplier, with your customers and with your suppliers, depending on whether you're, which part of the supply chain you're talking about. And ultimately, you're able to very succinctly talk to your customers in that particular market in advance during the sales cycle with an ability to be confident that you know and understand their reality, and that you know and understand and you're very conscious of their experience, and that you've thought it all the way through, and it's documented. It's documented in terms and conditions, and it's documented in any contracts of sale or whatnot that you may have. So those are the three main areas that I think, it sounds like a lot of work, and like the previous panel said, do your homework, know your market, but this takes it one step more. The more of the details that you can actually know, the less your particular risk. And at least if there's going to be a risk, you will have identified it in advance, and you'll hopefully have a potential plan so that if something goes wrong, you will have thought about it in advance and have a strategy about how to deal with these various problems, so that, again, these risks don't turn into unexpected things that really take you by surprise and can actually, harm your company, whether it be harm your company financially or harm your company's reputation in the actual marketplace. I don't know, Carolina, if there's any questions that are coming up in the chat box.
There is a couple of questions here. Do you consider market research as a tool to minimize the risks for a foreign investor or a company opening a new market?
I do view market research as a mitigating factor, but then I think that there's two levels of market research. The first level of market research is really understanding, for example, the demographics of a market, how many men versus women in a particular market, the age, the salary, so that you understand all of that, what I'm going to call basic information about the market. That's one level of market intelligence. The other level of market intelligence is what I was talking about. Take it one step further. What is that tariff classification that customs is going to put on your product when your product is imported into Canada? How are the taxing authorities going to view the taxing, for example, of GST on your particular product? Is it food? And if it's food, is it considered essential food, so it's exempt, or is it considered some sort of candy or snack where there could be tax on it? Don't make any assumptions. Work with service providers, work with those in your supply chain, the couriers and others, and get into the really detailed market analysis so that you really understand what your customer is actually going to live through in that market when they buy from you. So hopefully that answers that question. there's two levels. There's the traditional market research, and then I would suggest, if you really want to mitigate your risk, dive one level lower. Okay, thank you everyone, and I'm sorry.